Doc Slab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Doc Slab Audio and our Insights series. I do believe this is the 20th video in our Insights series, and in this video we want to talk about visualizing stereo field clarity issues. So first of all, this is a piece of software called Sonic Lineup, and what we're going to try to look at here is I want to try to help you visualize something that is kind of like trying to look at a spectrogram in the stereo field and seeing how that they are working together and against each other with the levels as they move around in the stereo field and the issues that can cause with clarity, so that you can have a better understanding to spend more time focusing on your stereo field and cleaning things up like you would when working in the spectral domain. And also when you're trying to get washes and things like that, don't go so heavy on your reverb. Don't try to get so much mud going on as far as what's happening there, because it's probably way more than you need for the effect you're trying to get. Now, when we get in and we start looking at the stereo field, that we're looking at, like, let's say we got these two waveforms here. And if I take these two waveforms here and I try to spread this out a little bit so you can see this, that these are two of the same waveforms. Now, these two waveforms, one of them is stereo and one of them is mono. Now, the concept here is on the stereo file that it's leaning one to one side, okay, but it's still stereo. So when I look at the stereo azimuth here, is that if you look at this, if I'm looking at the mono, it's just mono. It's giving no information about right and left. It doesn't exist, okay? But that's wrong, right? Because you hear it right and left, correct? But in the stereo field, it doesn't register that way. There is no stereo field at all. It is dead center. There is no perceived stereo field or anything happening in the stereo field. It's trying to make it sound completely centered. It's a huge concept that you really need to understand, and really seeing it in an azimuth form is very helpful. Now, when we get into the other file that's just like that, if we look at this, that we can see that it's gone off to one side, but it's not centered there, right? What it's trying to do is you have it centered kind of off to one side a majority of the wash, and you can see some standing out things that are happening here in this. This is one vocal. It's just a vocalist saying, you know, I can't remember what it's saying, but it's just a vocalist singing. So you understand, you look at all these inflections with the waveforms. You see it going up here, you see it going down there. It's doing that all over the place. It's because there's two different waveforms conflicting with each other, which it's not just having a problem in the spectral field, that these different things are happening at different levels, going in different directions in the stereo field as well. So it's not just in the level, you know, if you look at two different waveforms conflicting with each other, that it's not just the levels that are offset, it's the stereo field that are offset also, which is causing mud. It's causing a wider stereo field off to just one side here. That is really a trip, isn't it? So what you're looking at here is all this information is blending and conflicting and merging to cause whatever sound of this vocalist, with the saturation, noise, distortion, harmonic content, harmonic distortion, all over some of it in totally different areas in the stereo field. That is a total trip, right? And you look at this, this gives you a really good understanding of how important it is to have really good captures of really good performances and clean them up really well. And when you start working at things in the stereo field, to really spend your time there when you're trying to get clarity and move things into their own space because of the mess that it actually can be, even with one of the instruments, say the vocalist here, all that's going on there in the stereo field. It is amazing. And you really want to keep that in mind. Even if you have a mono file and you're trying to push it off to one side or the other, you more likely are going to get a lot of this kind of stuff happening that is going to reduce clarity. That is sometimes good to make things sound blended and they have this nice analog warmth sound of things blending and working together and a little wash kind of things happening with things riding on top of each other. But too much of it, you just lose clarity, and it's unbelievable how fast you can lose clarity. So you really want to keep that in mind even when you're working with one instrument. Now we get into these other tracks. These are other songs. So if we get into these here, I've got a couple different songs here, and they're in stereo, showing them in stereo. They're quite different music. This is a song called Crazy by Seal. This is a song called Big Generator by Yes, and this is Different People from No Doubt. And if you watch this and look at this, it's amazing at what they were trying to do and trying to see what's going on here. The idea here is like, if you look at Big Generator here, you can see how far they've panned everything off right and left, and it's just ghosting in the center. Does that make sense? And if you look at this right here, it's really blended fairly centered between about here and here, and not really far out in the stereo field. And you got something trailing along here. It's more than likely something in the lower or higher end that isn't as audible as some of the other frequency levels, and so they've boosted the level up a little bit so you can hear it as equal to the other stuff that's going on. But you can see where it's at, right? Between there and some spikes happening. This, it's leaning off way over to the other side. Here, not so much. It's really centered going all the way along here, and everything itself's ghosted, which is exactly opposite of what's happening during the main vocals here of Yes, trying to achieve the type of clarity that they're looking for in their production with their instrumentation. There's a huge difference between this, isn't there? And in all these songs, there's quite a bit going on. You know, and the Yes one here looks way more muddled than even this one, which is this Different People by No Doubt, which is still fairly centered. They normally have a lot of stuff going on either side, and they're pretty good about that. And you can see it jumping back and forth. It looks like it's kind of washing up in here, but if you look at it really close, it's bouncing back and forth. It's giving this thing happening, where a lot of it isn't doing there. And here on this one, it's so straight across there, it's not even funny. And if you look here, they're trying to attain some type of wash, where you hear this stuff going on in the middle. It's just barely above the rest of it. And sometimes it's not even, it's blending to have this real nice wash. And they've got that whole stereo field full. You can look at it all the way across there. I mean, it's like something to a paintbrush. Does that make sense? And it's full, that stereo field, you know, trying to give this full wash sound, you know, with something just riding it fairly centered in the middle. And, you know, you can see them trying to do that a little bit here, but not quite so much, and in different areas. Does that make sense? And it's really a trip to look at it on stuff like this and looking at the azimuth to really understand that even when you look at this, if I zoom in on any of these and I say, okay, let's just go ahead and zoom in a little bit so we can see this, all the stuff that's going on. It looks like somebody went crazy with a stenograph paper, you know, on some of that photo, on that copy paper, right? But if you really get into it and look at it, you can see all the conflicting levels on either side. Things are working against each other all over the place in the stereo field. These are different harmonic contents of different instruments that are all over. And depending on what kind of complement of instruments you got happening at any given time, what all is going on in the stereo field. And sometimes you think that it sounds really full like this. This is how it looks really full in the stereo field, where this is more in like from here to here, leaning off to this one side. And this in here, the same for about there. And it's fairly well centered. It's not really wide in the stereo field. When you can see it going off way over here, really full off to one side, really full off to the other, back and forth, all the way across this thing. You can see that Why would they do that? What's going on there in instrumentation to cause that to happen? That's a fairly long moment in time where they didn't do that here. And then they tightened up here, and they've got it coming in and out here pretty obviously. Here, look how mono it went. All of a sudden, it's just like mono, bam, mono, and they start widening it up. Then they tighten it up, and then it goes off to one side a little bit. And then it's pretty wide, then tightened up, and then wide, tightened up, wide, off to one side, all the way along here, bro. And then it really leans off over here, some things hitting way over here, then off over there, up against each other, tightens up. I mean, it's really a trip because you're getting to see all kinds of spectral content and the stereo field and the realms of what's happening. What is really going on there, so that you can really start to understand that whenever you're working with the stereo field, that every time you every moment in time is really important. And the closer you zoom in on things to really see each individual moment in time, trying to see what is happening right there, between right there. And when those instruments hit right there, what all is going? And all of a sudden, bap, it's hitting right over there, or it's like here and here, but a little bit heavier in the center. And then it kind of leans off out here, a little bit farther in the stereo field here and there, and then it just kind of washes here a little bit, and then it hits very center and off to the other side, and you kind of see the progression of this. It's very informative to help you understand. And even when you do that, a lot of times you got a lot of ghosting stuff happening out there, that the more time you spend on really trying to clean up your stereo field, cleaning up your spectral content, and filtering really well, and getting things in their place as well as possible, the better you are off. And when you do washes, that to really be considerate of what's going on there. And you can see that there's quite a bit of clarity here, which means they probably didn't have a lot of reverb going on there, but it's really full. If there was a lot of reverb here, this would look like white. I mean, it would look muddy, muddy white, and there would be no clarity. These individual entities at these levels all over the place in the stereo field. And these are multiple instruments, different parts of their harmonic content all over the place at different levels that are building that. Does that make sense? That are weaving in and out of the stereo field. It's not like it's in the right. It's weaving up, it's weaving down. Why is it doing that coming in and out of the stereo field, bro? What's going on there? Why is the waveforms causing to do that? It's a trip, but it's something you really want to think about, because these things flying around the stereo field are almost like flying around like waveforms do, on a piece of captured audio. It is very enlightening as far as the stereo field is concerned, and doing some study on it with something like Sonic Lineup here is very informative to really help you what instruments are actually doing, what they do together actually, and how much mud actually happens, how much you want to stay away from reverb, stay away from washes being too prominent, backing off, because they will have as good effect. And when you really want hyper clarity or middle of the road clarity, what you really need to do to really achieve that and be able to visualize what you're doing to help you do that, so that you can become a much more informed engineer whenever dealing with the stereo azimuth. Anytime you're looking at any type of a waveform, you look at this small area like that right there, that you see that small area right there, and you start looking at a stereo azimuth, what is actually happening there? Does that make sense? And when they start weaving in and out of the stereo field, this is one instrument, bro, and it's weaving all the way out here in the stereo field before it dies back in. Why would that happen? Does that make sense? It's a trip because it's perceived that way as you put things together, that the levels and how things are, for reasons sometimes unknown, things look like they're moving around in the stereo field when they're really not. Does that make sense? But it's perceived that way, and so it will come out sounding like it is when it really isn't. And it's really a conundrum of losing clarity in the stereo field without understanding that this kind of stuff is happening, and being able to determine whenever you start trying to put things in their place, clean things up, and get things clean, so you have a nice clean stereo field, to really take these things into consideration, so that as you're moving along through a production, that you can look at the stereo field like this, and you can pull out a piece of software and see all these individual moments that are happening with all these individual instruments, and be able to listen to it as you go through it and see what's happening in stereo field, so that you get way more familiar with it, so you're able to do a much better job and enjoy the beauty. To me, it's cool. I love audio engineering. This is one of the reasons, because stuff like this is so cool. You can sit there, it's like this cool tapestry of all these things happening in the stereo field, and little teeny moments of everything that you do when you put things together, and it's just wildly complex and so cool. And the better you understand that, the better you're going to be able to produce music, the better you're going to compose, the better you're going to engineer, and the better you're going to master your things when doing productions. So peace, self-love. I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video, and I will see you in the next video.